At 72, Lenora Mae Whitcomb had hands that looked as if they had been carved from juniper bark. They were narrow, weathered, and strong enough to pull a frightened ewe from a drift of spring snow. For more than 40 years, those hands had opened the same red gate before sunrise on her ranch outside Juniper Hollow, Oregon. They had carried buckets, repaired wire, mixed grain, delivered lambs, packed school lunches, and held the hand of her husband, Silas Whitcomb, on the winter morning when his heart finally stopped. People in town believed they understood Lenora because they had known her for so long. They knew she drank her coffee black, drove an aging green pickup, wore her silver hair in a braid, and never left church before stacking the folding chairs. They also knew she loved her sheep. The flock had begun with 6 ewes given to her and Silas as a wedding gift. Over the decades, it had grown into the finest small flock in Morrow County. That was why the handwritten notice taped to the window of Bellwether Feed and Hardware left the town stunned. Complete flock dispersal, it said. All breeding ewes, lambs, and rams to be sold on Saturday. Seller Lenora Whitcomb. By noon, everyone had a theory. The bank was taking the ranch. Her medical bills had become impossible. Her son had abandoned her. The dry year had finally broken her. Lenora heard every rumor. But when people asked what was wrong, she gave the same answer. Nothing is wrong. It is simply time. Her calmness made them worry more. Juniper Hollow was not much more than a school, a church, a volunteer fire station, a gas pump, and a line of weather-beaten houses pressed against the high desert wind. The nearest hospital was nearly an hour away, and the nearest large grocery store was farther than most people cared to drive in winter. Sheep, wheat, and cattle kept the town alive. The school kept it human. Juniper Hollow Community School served children from kindergarten through 8th grade in a low brick building beside a grove of cottonwoods. Lenora had worked there as cafeteria manager for 31 years before retiring. She knew which children hated peas, which ones pretended not to be hungry, and which ones slipped half a sandwich into their coat pocket for a younger brother at home. She had never embarrassed them. She simply placed extra food where they could reach it and looked away. Now, however, Lenora seemed to need help herself. Her son, Abram Whitcomb, drove from Pendleton as soon as he heard about the sale. Abram was 50, broad-shouldered, careful with money, and employed as an irrigation systems technician. He found his mother in the lambing shed, sorting halters into a wooden box. "You should have called me," he said. Lenora did not look up. "You would have tried to stop me." "Stop you from what? Losing the ranch is paid for. Then why sell everything?" She folded a leather strap and placed it in the box. "Because keeping something is not always the same as needing it." Abram stared at her. "Those sheep are your livelihood. They were part of my livelihood. They were Dad's life." At that, Lenora finally looked at him. Her gray eyes did not harden, but something inside them closed. "Your father's life was not woolen fences. Do not make him smaller than he was." Abram regretted the words immediately. Yet his fear remained. He offered to pay her bills. She refused. He suggested selling only half the flock. She refused again. When he demanded to see her bank statements, she opened the shed door and said quietly, "You are my son, Abram. You are not my keeper." That same week, the Juniper Hollow School Board called an emergency meeting. The old school roof had been patched so many times that rainwater traveled through the ceiling along paths no one could predict. The heating system failed whenever the temperature dropped too quickly, and the small bus that carried children from distant ranches needed a new engine. State funding had fallen short, enrollment had declined, and the district superintendent had arrived with a proposal no one wanted to hear. Unless the town raised a large emergency contribution, the school would close at the end of the term. The younger children would be bused almost 2 hours each day to a regional school. Older students would leave before sunrise and return after dark during winter. Teachers would lose their jobs. Families already considering moving away would have one more reason to leave. Principal Tamsin Vale, a 44-year-old former special education teacher, stood before the board with both hands braced against the table. "Closing the school will not save this town," she said. "It will empty it." The amount required was far beyond anything Juniper Hollow had ever raised. Big sales and raffles would not be enough. A rancher offered a calf, a mechanic offered free labor on the bus. Parents pledged what they could. But even together, they were nowhere close. Lenora sat in the back row, silent. She had worn her good blue coat and carried an envelope inside her purse. No one noticed when she left before the meeting ended. Lenora had first entered that school as a thin, frightened girl with a patched dress and shoes that pinched her toes. Her father had disappeared before she could remember his face. Her mother, Beatrice Calder, followed harvest work across eastern Oregon, taking Lenora along whenever there was no one to watch her. Some months they slept in a trailer. Other months they rented a room behind a packing shed. Food was never certain. Shame was. On Lenora's first day in Juniper Hollow, a boy laughed when her stomach growled during reading. She decided she would never return. But at lunch, the cafeteria cook, Mrs. Odessa Pike, placed a full tray in front of her and said, "I made too much soup, and I need someone responsible to help me solve the problem." Lenora understood years later that there had been no extra soup. Mrs. Pike had invented dignity where charity might have caused humiliation. Her teacher, Mr. Halden Reese, began leaving books on her desk. He never said they were gifts. He told her he needed someone to check whether the stories were worth keeping. Through those books, Lenora learned that her life could be larger than the room she slept in. She graduated, married Silas, raised Abram, and returned to the school as cafeteria manager. For 3 decades, she repeated Mrs. Pike's kindness in quiet ways. A second helping placed near a hungry child. A winter coat hung on the lost and found rack with the right name written inside. A birthday cake made for a student whose family had forgotten. The school had not merely taught Lenora to read. It had taught her that receiving help did not make a person small. Now the building that had protected her dignity was about to disappear. And she knew exactly what she possessed that could save it. Saturday arrived cold and bright. Trucks lined the county road before sunrise. Ranchers came from across Oregon and Washington because Whitcomb sheep were known for strong mothers and healthy lambs. Neighbors came too, some intending to bid, others simply unwilling to let Lenora face the day alone. The auctioneer, Hollis Vane, was a 63-year-old livestock broker with a gravelly voice and a reputation for fairness. Before the first pen opened, he approached Lenora. "You can still change your mind," he said. "No shame in that. I know. I could sell part today and schedule the rest later. All of them, Hollis, even the black-faced ewe." He nodded toward Maribel, the oldest ewe in the flock, born during the final lambing season Silas had shared with her. Lenora's mouth trembled. Even Maribel, the bidding began. One pen after another passed through the ring. Lenora stood beside the rail and spoke softly to each buyer, explaining which ewe preferred shelter, which lamb had been bottle-fed, and which ram became restless around dogs. People mistook her attention for desperation. In truth, she was saying goodbye correctly. Abram watched from behind the crowd, angry at her silence and ashamed of his anger. When Maribel entered the ring, Lenora pressed one hand to her chest. The ewe lifted her head at the sound of Lenora's voice. For a moment, the entire yard seemed to go still. Then the bidding resumed. Maribel was purchased by Nolan Sutter, a 38-year-old rancher from outside Walla Walla, who had once been a student in Lenora's cafeteria. He paid far more than the ewe's market value. When the final trailer pulled away, the fields around Lenora's barn looked impossibly large. No bleating came from the pens, no bells moved in the distance. The silence was so complete that Abram finally understood what the sale had cost her. "Was it worth it?" he asked. Lenora watched dust settle over the road. "Ask me next week." The next Friday, every folding chair in the school gymnasium was filled. Principal Vale had called another community meeting, but refused to explain why. Teachers stood along the walls. Children sat cross-legged on the floor. The superintendent arrived carrying a folder and wearing the unsettled expression of a man whose certainty had been overturned. Lenora did not attend. Abram sat near the back, convinced the meeting concerned a final closure date. Principal Vale stepped to the microphone. Her voice shook before she spoke the first sentence. "Juniper Hollow Community School will remain open." For several seconds, no one reacted. Then the gym erupted. Parents cried. Teachers embraced. Children cheered without fully understanding how close they had come to losing the place. Abram remained seated. He knew the town had not raised enough money. Principal Vale lifted one hand for silence. "An anonymous donor has provided the entire remaining amount needed for the roof, the heating system, the bus repair, and the emergency reserve required by the district. The superintendent confirmed it. The donation had been transferred, verified, and accepted. Someone shouted, "Who?" Principal Vale looked down at the paper in her hand. The donor asked that her name not be shared, but she included a letter. And after speaking with her family, "I believe the truth belongs to this community." Abram felt the air leave his lungs. Principal Vale began to read. "This money is given in memory of Odessa Pike, who fed a hungry child without making her feel poor, and Halden Reese, who placed books in that child's hands until she could imagine a future. It is given for every boy or girl who has ever walked into this school, believing that the size of a family's bank account measures the value of a life. Please keep the doors open. Please keep the kitchen warm. Please make room for the child who is too ashamed to ask for help." Principal Vale stopped, unable to continue. Abram covered his face. Around him, former students began to understand. The sheep sale had not been evidence that Lenora was losing everything. It was the method she had chosen to give everything. By sunset, the story had traveled through every home in Juniper Hollow. People drove to Lenora's ranch, but Abram stood at the gate and asked them to give her one quiet night. Inside the empty barn, Lenora sat on an overturned bucket while he swept a floor that did not need sweeping. "Why did you not tell me?" he asked. "Because you would have offered your savings." "Of course I would have. And then you would have carried the fear of not having enough. I did not want to save children by frightening my own child." Abram leaned against the stall where Maribel had once slept. "You gave away Dad's flock," Lenora nodded. "Your father once told me that animals teach us when to hold on and when to let go. I held on for a long time." He knelt beside her. "What will you do now?" She looked through the open barn door at the dark pasture. "Learn what mornings sound like without sheep." But Juniper Hollow had other plans. Nolan Sutter contacted every buyer from the auction. Former students called one another. Ranchers offered lambs from their spring crop. Children collected coins, though the adults quietly returned the coins and recorded each child's name instead. A local carpenter repaired the empty pens. The mechanic who had offered to fix the school bus brought fencing supplies. Even the bank manager, who had allowed the foreclosure rumor to spread because of privacy rules, arrived with a load of hay. 1 week later, Abram drove his mother to the school under the excuse that Principal Vale needed her signature. When they turned onto the ranch road afterward, dozens of people were waiting beside the red gate. Behind them stood a small flock of ewes. At the front was Maribel, wearing a new brass bell. Lenora stopped walking. Nolan stepped forward and placed the lead rope in her hand. "I bought her," he said, "but I do not believe she ever agreed to leave you." Lenora tried to speak, but no sound came. Principal Vale explained that the flock belonged to Lenora with no debt and no conditions. It was not equal in size to what she had sold, but it was enough to begin again. Every ewe had been donated by someone whose life had been touched by the school or by Lenora herself. Maribel pressed her face against Lenora's coat. The old woman wrapped both arms around the ewe's neck and wept in front of the town for the first time anyone could remember. The school roof was replaced before the autumn rains. The heating system was repaired. The bus returned to its route, and no family had to send a child away before daylight. A small wooden plaque appeared beside the cafeteria door. It did not mention the amount Lenora had given. At her insistence, it carried only a sentence: no child should have to earn the right to feel worthy. Each spring, students from Juniper Hollow spent a day serving the community. Some repaired fences for elderly ranchers. Some packed meals. Some read to younger children. They called it the Open Door Day, not Lenora Day, because she said kindness should never belong to one name. Her new flock grew slowly. She never replaced every sheep she had sold, and she never tried. On quiet mornings, she would stand at the red gate listening to the bells move across the pasture. Sometimes children from the school visited to help during lambing season. Lenora taught them how to approach a frightened animal, how to recognize patience in silence, and how to let go without becoming empty. Years later, people still told the story of the week everyone believed Lenora Whitcomb had gone broke. They remembered how quickly they had confused sacrifice with failure. They remembered that the richest person in town had not been the one with the most land, the largest account, or the finest flock. It had been an old woman willing to sell what she loved so children she might never know could keep a place to learn, eat, belong, and dream. And perhaps that was the beautiful truth Juniper Hollow carried forward. Sometimes a person appears to have lost everything only because no one has yet seen where she chose to place it. Stories like Lenora's remind us that the quietest sacrifices can leave the loudest echoes. Somewhere, a person may be giving up something precious so another person can keep hope. Somewhere, a small kindness may be protecting a child from believing that hardship defines their worth. If this story stayed with you, please subscribe and become part of this community. Here, we share stories that honor compassion, courage, family, and the goodness people often carry without recognition. Your presence helps these stories travel farther, reach someone who needs them, and remind all of us that what we give with love is never truly lost.